All right, good to go.
Okay, good evening, everyone. May meeting, one more to go after this. Tonight we'll just a quick preview. We'll go through the normal order up front with public comment in the minutes, but then just get an update from both Leslie and Christina on budget adoption tomorrow, which would be obviously key event for the year for us. And then really at the end, probably won't take an hour, but we have left enough time for that discussion, but to talk about really the makeup of the end of year report that we'll bring back to the school board in terms of how we want to compose it. We'll chart our course for that. With that, any members of the public for public comment? You have 1 minute, and I remind you that board members and the BAC are not obligated to answer your questions. Thank you.
Hi, I think I'm the only one for public comment tonight. So I'm just here as compensation chair of the AEA, just to say we are excited to see boring budget times. Of course, waiting on Richmond to do their thing, and looking forward to as again, this inflation and the cost of living in this area continues and our neighboring districts rise to the occasion. We are going to continue to have to work really hard to keep our pay plans competitive with the region. And I am grateful to see what is in the budget, but as I think has been noted in multiple work sessions, that this is going to be a continual work in progress. And I look forward to being back with your group next year with the discussions. And with that, I will turn it back over and wish you the chance of an early meeting. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Josh. Okay. March minutes, there were 3 sets that went out for the 3 meetings we had. Obviously, we didn't have an April meeting due to the budget work session that Eric and I participated in. So with the 3 sets of March minutes, are there any issues with the minutes as composed? Okay. If not, do I have a motion to adopt the 3 sets of March minutes?
Motion.
Okay. And do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
All right. All those in favor, raise your hand virtually. All right. Motion carries. Thank you. For many of our reps that sit on other committees, any insights from those meetings that would be good for the good of the group? Yeah, Jennifer, go ahead.
I believe that the ASAC chair, Dave Rosenblatt, he sent ASAC's letter on the budget to the school board. I think it had some great, I think as I had previewed in a previous meeting, it had some really great suggestions. There were some very kind of no cost items that to sort of clarify in the budget that I hope the school board will consider adopting, that just sort of help to sort of clarify some of the planning factors that might technically, that maybe don't exist, but would otherwise be required in law and are implicit. And then he also had some good ideas that, to perhaps more equitably distribute resources that, if not considered this year, perhaps be considered for a future year. For example, one of the ideas was instead of changing the planning factor by elementary schools for 2, change it by 1, and instead dedicate like those 16.5 FTAEs for other planning factor changes around students with disabilities, which I think could quite possibly have a very similar impact in classrooms at the elementary school level, in terms of the learning environment for both gen ed and students with disabilities. So I don't know if that's publicly, I assume that could be publicly available. And I would hope that perhaps BAC members could get a copy of that. And I'm happy to sort of double check with Dave. I assume I could forward it along, but I think it's really worth folks sort of seeing what he put together. I think it was great.
Yeah, and it may be think about for
I lost you there for a minute, so you might want to repeat what you said.
Okay, yeah, my internet is suddenly going haywire here. Yeah, it may be worth taking a look at that just for consideration with our end of year report, especially given the size of the. Sorry, let me quit waving at the camera here. Sit on my hands. Given the size of the investment in special education we're making this year compared to any recent memory, definitely worth.
Christina, do you have access to that? Did you get that, and can you forward that to us?
I apologize. I was looking at something different. What was the question?
The letter from David Rosenblatt as the chair of ASAC on the budget.
Ah, yes, I can look for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely worth including, I think, or at least for consideration given the investment we're making this year with special education needs. So I think definitely worth a hard look from us on what we would want to discuss in our end of year report as part of that. Any other questions for Jennifer? Okay. Do now is turn over to Christina to talk about updates from the board, particularly looking ahead to tomorrow evening with the adoption of the proposed budget. Proposed budget. So Christina, floor is yours.
Appreciate it. I found the letter. I'll be putting it in the chat in a minute after I finish speaking. Not a ton of updates. We have the final approval tomorrow. There have been some last minute additions that we discussed at the most recent work session, including additional math supports and some funding for tutoring that we're working out the final details on. But other than that, that's been the sole topic of conversation, really. The rest of it has been exactly as was presented in the school board's proposed budget. So that's been fairly static since we adopted it right before spring break. In terms of the process, Leslie, I'll let you explain more of the minutia of how this is going to work with the state funding. But because we do not have a final number on state funding, we are going to have to come back and do some sort of a revision to this budget once we get that final number. It should be relatively straightforward, but just know that this is not the final approval because we're still going to have to come back and adjust accordingly with whatever number the state gives us. So that's all I've got. I'll put the letter in the chat in a moment.
Christina, based on what any of us may know about where Richmond is on the governor's budget, do we anticipate any significant gaps, or probably something that we would likely use reserves to plug?
Yeah, so the range, I think we talked about this at the last meeting that we had, that the House bill is -3 million. It's under what we were planning, but then the Senate bill is slightly above. It's about 1 million above. So we're looking at that range. Leslie, you can correct my numbers because I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head.
It's 1.4 more or 3.8 less.
Exactly. So that's kind of the range of what we're looking at. If anything were to come out beyond that, I'd be dramatically surprised, and it would mean that something gargantuanly insane had happened downstate that we were not expecting. Can that still happen? Absolutely. Nothing is final until it's final, but there's no evidence that I have seen or rumors that I have heard of that would suggest that it's going to be anything different than a meeting in between the two compromise bills. Does that answer your question, Anthony?
It does.
Sweet.
Eric, I think you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess just to follow on that, I mean, do you think the expectation, I know it's we don't know for sure, obviously, but the expectation would be any changes would just be an adjustment to what we use or don't use in reserves versus going in back? Okay.
Yeah, that is the plan. That was the superintendent's request, actually. And we as a board approved and agreed with that is an easier process, and it adds more clarity for staff and for the community, because we are not going to go back and relitigate anything. We would just adjust up or down the number that we had been using for reserves.
Okay, thank you.
Cool.
Any other questions for Christina?
I'm not going anywhere, so if you have other questions later on, I'll still be here.
All right, we'll turn it over to Leslie, who will give us an update on the budget, just with some of the changes going into tomorrow evening, and then we'll transition after that to discussing the end of year report. So Leslie, your floor.
Christina actually spoke to that. You know, we're not really free to say exactly what's happening in the school board's budget for tomorrow evening. There are some changes, but they're following straight along the line of what was discussed at the last work session. And so you can expect to see some changes coming forward tomorrow night as a result of those discussions. As Christina said, this isn't the final. We will have to come back after the General Assembly approves its budget. We're hoping that they approve it sometime soon and don't wait until the very last second, because both the state and localities have to have a balanced budget approved by June 30. So if they stretch it out to the end of June, it makes it very difficult, because then we have to have a called meeting and all of those good things. I did read an article very recently that said that they think the next 2 to 3 weeks they will have closure. Whether that actually remains to be seen, we will see what happens. But yes, it would just be an action coming back to the board to say state revenue changed, so state revenue up or down, and then, if state revenue is up, then we'd probably reduce the amount of reserves unless there was something that the board wanted to add at that point. If state revenue is down, we'd just take additional funding from the reserves to balance the budget. Other than that, it's almost done.
Okay. Any questions for Leslie?
All right, I'll be around as well.
Okay.
Any questions? Happy to answer.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, for everyone's awareness, tomorrow night at 7 will be the school board meeting for the adoption of the proposed budget. So, feel free to tune in. And, as they said, the last work session is a preview of what changes will be added in to the budget. So, I'll let those stand for themselves. But suffice to say, much different environment that we've been working in with, again, as we've talked about over the past few months, talking about the investments we're able to make as opposed to disinvesting and having to make further cuts in the budget to make ends meet. So definitely a good environment to be in. Michael, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, that was just a mistake. I apologize.
Oh, okay, no problem. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll transition to talk about the end of year report and the responsibilities we have left to close this fiscal year out as the BAC. Before we go into that, probably should have added it as an agenda item, but I didn't think about it till afterwards. But maybe give a couple of minutes, sort of my top line impressions of the budget work session we had, because I think that'll also help frame some of the discussion about the end of year report. The BAC was obviously Eric and I attended on behalf of the group here, and the first time in a while where we had a formal presentation back to the school board, and then probably about 20 to 30 minutes of questions from the different board members about different aspects of our presentation, but also other areas of the budget, about what we may have looked at, not looked at, just to, open dialogue at that point about, where we saw things. And, I think from the top line, we noted the concerns about future year deficits and, appropriate use of one-time dollars versus recurring, to pay for recurring expenses. I think Dr. Cannon gave a pretty candid answer that is worth noting, I think, to everyone here, that given the size of the closeout and having the $62.5 million that came back from that, certainly the public viewing such a sizable return back to the county, or not to the county, but to the board, to ensure that money is reinvested back into the schools. And I think that's an important piece of context to have as we think about the long-term fiscal sustainability of the budget. And so I appreciated her candor, noting that, yes, they're making a significant amount of investment in this budget that is relying on one-time dollars to in part pay for recurring expenses, but with a view that her sense was this was the time to reinvest and make those investments, given that there was an opportunity to do so. Obviously, it remains to be seen how that's going to play out over the next few years, but having an understanding of where her thinking was, I thought was an important piece of feedback that Eric and I got in the meeting. We talked about, there was a lot of back and forth about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think what we tried to thread the needle on was how much of this was less planning in the budget, but more the application of the resources that the budget is providing, and noting that the student progress dashboard would give us a way in the future to be able to look at across all the schools and the school divisions how we might reallocate resources to better achieve equity goals, particularly class sizes or added resources in those schools that are lagging behind in achievement and performance. And so just noting that, it was hard to say whether or not we were providing enough resources to address those achievement gaps. But now that there is more publicly available data to us to look across APS and see where there are differences in different student populations and how well they are doing, noting that using those tools into the future will be an important way publicly to understand how resources are being allocated, and I think more importantly, accountability of the resource allocation and making sure that we are focused on the right things. The last bit And it's certainly an area where we were asked by the board to provide our view. And I think important in the end of year report to make sure that we respond to the board's request of us was about the use of the different reserve funds. And what was asked of us was, what our views of the reserve usage has been, how ought they be used, and how the BAC as a body views reserve usage, and giving our advice back to the school board. So definitely as part of our end of year report, I want to make sure that we respond back to that question that we had from one of the board members. Overall, I think it was an important opportunity for us, and certainly something to carry forward into the future, being able to have direct dialogue with the school board, giving them our views, even though we certainly will have differences of opinion, but I think to help be a voice for the public, given our we're parents, we most of it, all of us have kids in the school system, but also given our level of understanding of the budget, being able to marry those two things up and provide the board with our advice and our views of how the proposed budget meets or doesn't meet certain goals. And I thought that was an important step forward for our role as part of the overall process. Eric, certainly a number of things that you highlighted in the meeting. Welcome your thoughts and impressions based on the work session last month.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit on a lot of the big ones, but we did spend some time directly and indirectly talking about learning loss and the need to be focusing dollars on bridging that gap, using the data that's available to help us target that so it's best applied from a diversity perspective. So I thought that was a very good discussion. I think that ties back to kind of the use of one-time funds, right? That's actually a very good opportunity to use one-time funds to help try and spend in a short period of time, or some period of time, dollars to try and catch up, right? And specifically help the kids where the need is greatest. So I thought that was a good discussion. I think we also Chucky did a good job of introducing the key risks that need to be considered, and I think that's important, not just highlighting it for this year's budget, but going forward. I think that needs to be something that needs to be addressed, ideally quantitatively, in the budgets, right? So how do we hedge against some of those risks so when they do come true, we're not scrambling to try and address them. I thought that was a good discussion and something that was provided a lot of value, both short term and for the long term. Again, the key point in my mind that we addressed, and the key thing that we presented was just simply that we are concerned about those out-year projected deficits, that they are they increase over the next several years and potentially could flatten out, but they do present a high risk that we are going to need to keep close track of and manage against. So and obviously using one-time funds and reserves to cover ongoing expenses just amplifies that risk. So it was something we brought up, and we talked about the possibility, or at least looking at taking some of the expenditures and not necessarily making them all this year. Instead, looking at breaking those up and applying them over a couple years to help hedge against some of those risks. So I thought all those key things were good, and I agree. I think this was a great opportunity to talk to the board as the budget, as the BAC, and set us up to do this each year. I think it's actually an important step, an important piece of how we can contribute to the process overall.
And
Yeah.
I'll add on behalf of the rest of the board that that it was, in terms of structure, I think it was very much appreciated that we had the time to dig in with y'all. And that this structure going forward makes a lot of sense in terms of conversation, in terms of the way that we're organizing this. And I think it'll be repeated in the future.
No, thank you, Christine. I think it was, because each of the board members comes at this a different way, and so I think for us to hear, some differing views or different lines of questioning into areas that we may not have looked as hard at, also I think helps us gain some better insight into ways in which we can shape our advice looking forward. So I definitely think it's a practice that ought to continue. I do want to circle back on one thing Eric noted that was an interesting point of discussion, and that was when we addressed some of the areas of risk that we saw, the thinking ahead about the impact of projected declining enrollment and what that might mean for the revenue sharing agreement between the county and APS. And I don't know that we can understate enough the pressure at some point in the county that APS could face with respect to declining enrollment and a view of how much money should be allocated to APS if enrollment continues to decline as projected. And so not taking for granted the current agreement, whether formal or informal, taking that for granted, and then we find ourselves in a fiscal environment where other parts of the county that require revenue, particularly in the realm of public safety, public health, things that the county also has to attend to, what that can mean for APS. So certainly, of the different risks that we talked about in the work session, that was the one that really jumped out and had a bit of an animated discussion that this was something important to keep our eye on, and making sure that that revenue sharing agreement we protect to the degree we can over time, so that we have some degree of predictability of what future revenue might look like. Eric?
Yeah, and it's not just as a number itself, the flattening or the declining of the student population. It's the student age population of the county as a percentage of the total population, right? If 12% of our population now is student age, and we're spending just under 50% of our Arlington dollars on that, if that percentage goes down to 10 or 9% of the population overall, because Arlington is expected to grow, then there'll just be more pressure, right, to use some of those dollars on the growing part of our county. So I think it's the combination of those two things together, I think that amplifies that risk.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I appreciate that context. Anybody have any questions for Eric or I before we transition to our final topic about the end of year report? Okay. What we'll do now is we'll talk about the end of year report and our responsibilities that we have. And as noted in the email that went out about this month's agenda, one of the things that we have an opportunity to do with the end of year report is to look ahead to next year and helping shape the budget direction that the board will provide to APS when decided. In the past, we have not usually focused on that in the end of year report, but last year there was Melanie made the decision, and one that I think was an important one that including it as part of the end of year report in June gives us an opportunity to shape it based on the budget development cycle. Having a new team in September, it's almost, our input is almost too late at that point. And so our ability to provide that advice in a way that is timely isn't well suited to doing it in the September timeframe, because that's when that guidance is really taking its final form and being presented to the superintendent. So part of what we will do in our end of year report is we will look at how we what items within the budget direction we want to focus on, and provide some feedback to the board on what next year's budget direction might look like. So once we have the adopted budget and we see where the chalk line has been snapped, absent some decision out of Richmond on what the state budget's going to look like, but we'll have a 99% solution at that point. Okay, this is what the budget's going to look like, and then looking ahead to next year, what things might we want the board to look at in terms of budget direction. Some of the things that were very clear this year was the areas of investment and priorities that the board wanted to take, and I'll commend the board and the superintendent, a pretty laser focused effort to stick to the priorities that were outlined in the budget direction. So those are the types of things we'll want to think about. The other part of it is then just the end of year report in terms of, we have areas of concern or areas of emphasis that we've addressed year over year. And some of those items we certainly carry forward into, subsequent year reports. But then also being able to address topics that might be important to us to highlight from a budget perspective that may not be, they may not even be necessarily relevant for the fiscal year that we currently address. We may want to talk about, class sizes or other studies that, like, for example, looking at planning factors, which is always something that comes up, but, different topics like that we might be able to propose as part of the end of year report, so that if there are areas of study or areas of emphasis that we think the board ought to think about, this is our opportunity to do that. So as we look at our remaining time for our schedule, we'll have an input period where over the next couple of weeks, I'll ask for BAC members to provide input on, one of three things. Either, input on the budget direction and those items you think ought to be included in the budget direction. Having given everyone the previous 3 years worth of reports, and certainly you can go back further in time if you so choose. They're publicly available on the BAC site with APS. What items do we want to continue to carry forward that we feel are trends or longer running strategic issues we may want to address? And then if there are specific topics that you think ought to be highlighted in the end of year report, that would be important to make note of those things. So I'll have a comment period for about 2 weeks. After that 2 weeks, we're going to snap the chalk line. I'll compile, consolidate, draft the final draft. I'll pass it to someone on the team to do a good proofread and make sure it sounds coherent and it's not the ravings of a madman. And then at that point, we'll pass it back for everyone to reconsider the final form of the report, and then we'll discuss it. Really our June meeting will focus on the final draft of the end of year report and our input on next year's budget direction. Those will be the two items we'll discuss in June. And then from there, if there are any changes that need to be made, we'll make changes to the end of year report, and then we'll pass that over to the school board, and that will conclude our participation this year as a group. So before we get into any specific discussion about the report, any questions on the way ahead with respect to the BAC's end of year report? Leslie.
Thanks, Chuck. I just wanted to make sure that you knew that what the timetable is for that. So absolutely, we can discuss the end of year report on the Wednesday the 8th of June. But then you will need to get it to me shortly thereafter, because I need to be able to provide a response to the report. And then all of that needs to be posted by June 16. So not a lot of time between the 8th meeting when you decide you want to finalize and then when it needs to be posted for the school board.
Okay. And after we get our first draft put together, I'll give you an early read so you've got advance warning on the major themes and topics that we're talking, so you have a little bit more time than just the 8th.
Perfect.
Does that work?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, definitely don't want to jam you with an end of year project at the last minute. So once we have a good first draft, we'll pass that over as a courtesy copy so you can begin your work on forming response. Okay, so I want to open it up to the different members that are assembled tonight. A couple of things that are on my mind as I think about where we may want to focus in the end of year report. Certainly, first and foremost, to respond to the board's request to look at reserve usage and having a view of that. So I think that one is certainly important for us to be responsive to. As always, I think fiscal sustainability has been something that we've noted, and probably every one of these end of year reports, certainly some others, but I'd like to hear other thoughts from across the group about areas that they're concerned about looking ahead into the future and what type of advice we may wish to give. Eric?
Yeah, so just to kind of build on one of the things that was discussed, learning loss is going to be something that we're going to need to tackle, for the next several years, right? And I think it deserves an investment. And so I think there needs to be some sort of recommendation about a plan on how that could be tackled, and then a estimated budget need to get to that, so that actually can be addressed. And again, it's a good candidate for one-time reserves, right? That could be spent over a couple of years, but they're not recurring over perpetually. But I think the other thing that ties into that then is another point that we brought up in the board meeting was being able to measure and tell whether or not we're being effective in using those dollars. So I think a key point we do want to stress, and it's something that comes up all the time, is the need to have a learning loss plan that an expected cost for that, and how we would measure progress and know when we've tackled it and can stop spending money on it. I think that's one thing I would want to add in there.
Yeah, and I think you really hit on something at the end that I think was important. As I recall, the work session discussion was bounding some of these investments by time and trying to sort how long we need to make it a particular investment to give it adequate time to take effect, but also some measure of accountability that if it's not working as we had intended, when is there a decision to either change course or stop making the investment? Jennifer.
Yeah, I guess I'll hop in here. I have a couple of ideas, but I want to focus on the learning loss one now since y'all have brought it up. I agree that how do we tie that to metrics to know like the outer bound, is, and to recognize that these shouldn't be perpetual ongoing costs. One of the things I would really like to see I'd like for folks to consider in our recommendation, next year will be the 4th year of the pandemic. I really feel strongly that we need to be thinking about a plan and not just sort of tutoring here or this here, but really like a comprehensive sort of plan. I think that I would hope that we would consider making a recommendation that there is sort of thoughts of a plan with some of these outer bounds, considered as part of that perhaps goes forward before the next budget cycle starts. So in other words, perhaps is timed with the consideration of the closeout funds, which again, I think I heard you all say that's a great use of one-time funds, and I agree. Otherwise, I think that my fear is that if we allow this conversation to continue to not happen, that we don't start to even really have a plan until the 5th year of the pandemic. And that to me is sort of unconscionable. So I'd really like to, sort of think about it. And I'm going to put in the chat, by the way, there is this fantastic interview with a professor at Harvard. They're doing a 2-year study on learning loss on the pandemic and the effects of it, and really tying that to how systems should be using either their federal funds, or if those are gone, using other, what really needs to be done, and really like getting at this issue that it's not just one solution, it is a range of issues. And there are many, many ways that this budget this year does move in that good direction. But I think to really begin to sort of tie those together in a cohesive way, and then perhaps attach dollars to that, to be looking at if there are enough, if the closeout situation is in a good place, that we begin to sort of put that in place in the 4th year rather than waiting for the 5th year.
No, thank you for that. Did you have anything else since you've got the floor? Is there other items that you wanted to go ahead and address?
Yeah, I'll just preview those. Is the other one, it's a carryover from previous years, but the idea of really digging into a cost benefit analysis of the option schools. I was kind of surprised in our discussion earlier this year that like that sort of doesn't exist. I did sort of see that there was an audit, and I'll pop that in the chat too, of some findings that an audit sort of that the audit sort of found, and I think that sort of makes some recommendations for a longer study. So and kind of tied to that, just my daughter goes to Claremont Immersion, right? And I know that this year the board voted for on the immersion visioning plan. And then a few weeks later, we had an additional vote to pause VLP, and obviously there's a group coming together to sort of study how to move forward with the VLP program to serve those students that most would benefit from it. And I think that missing in both of those conversations is this sort of broader step back look at the big picture of the option schools. What they're, in the cost benefits of those. And I think that the time is really now to do that. And I think it's actually a tweak that I might sort of have on that as well too is, and Leslie might sort of hate this idea, maybe it's a terrible idea, is as proposals are brought to the school board for them to vote on, is it possible that there can be any sort of informal estimate of what those proposals might cost if adopted? For example, again, looking at the Claremont, the immersion one, there were some things that might be budget neutral, and there were some things that would definitely have a budget cost, but I don't remember any sort of discussion around the budgetary effects of adopting the visioning proposal, which I think is very important. But, I think, again, there has to be that discussion of the cost versus the benefit. So that's sort of maybe a secondary part of the option school. It's actually a broader one, I think, for any proposal that might come before for a vote is if it's possible to have an informal estimate if time allows. And then the last thing I would sort of, that's kind of on my mind as well too, is to put in, I don't know if it belongs in the year-end report or not, but I saw today, I'm so thrilled that APS is seeking feedback on the allocation of the American Rescue Plan dollars. I know that that's a regulatory requirement of the dollars. I would love to see out there both an analysis, both the like, we have the application, we know what was allocated, what things were allocated for, what's been expended to date, what's left over. For example, some things may have been reimbursed through FEMA, that sort of thing. I think that's so important, I think, for the transparency of those additional federal dollars. And so anyways, and I also, by the way, I just urge folks to take a look at that and perhaps provide feedback to APS by May 18th as that is out there. And very much thank APS for putting that out there. But I think to have perhaps greater transparency around the expenditure and availability of American Rescue Plan dollars, I think is part of that recovery plan discussion too.
Okay, thank you. Other members? Eric?
Sure. So I'll just chime in with another one that, again, became pretty apparent to me. And this isn't necessarily BAC specific, but Chuck, if you remember after the meeting, you and I, and it actually came up during the meeting where, the question was about, how do we work with the other advisory committees? And we talked a little bit about, well, we have liaisons that kind of work across groups to help facilitate discussions. But we certainly talked afterwards a little bit with Dr. Kennan about potentially, I think, a good idea on how to make progress on some bigger topics where we, instead of having the teams go and have a liaison and go, just sit in and talk about what's going on in general or holistically, that we have individuals from each committee come together to focus on a specific topic. So if there's work to be done on learning factors actually crosses a lot of what many committees do. And so a good approach might be to actually, for the year on a certain schedule, bring together someone or two people from each committee to be working through something on that topic. So again, learning factors, great topic where there is obviously budget implications to anything we want to try and do. And that's important feedback or input as we work through what those changes could be, what they should be, what are we trying to accomplish. We need to balance out the costs for that. So I think that might be something we want to put in there as a recommendation, not specific to the budget, but rather, specific to how the advisory committees can work together and be more effective.
Yeah, and planning factors, learning loss, equity funding, those seem to be some pretty dominant themes among some others. But yes, I think that was one thing. Dr. Cannon did a good job this year with the advisory chairs, bringing us together periodically. Probably 2 times out of a 3-month period, but being able to discuss different things at the committee chair level. But certainly, I think when you get to something that might be a working group kind of focus, as you highlight, Eric, I think it seems to me there's an appetite to do some more of that and take advantage of the interest and the expertise assembled across the different advisory groups to be able to do that. Michael.
Thanks, Chuck. Good evening, everybody. Just going to say that a lot of the ideas I had written down here have already been mentioned by Jennifer, you, Chuck, and Eric. Eric actually just took one of mine because I had watched your presentation to the board, and that one really jumped out to me, where there was discussion about more collaboration between the different committees around planning factors and learning factors and all that. And I'm in complete agreement with both of you that that's an area where Again, I sit on the liaison to the ACTL committee, and I feel like there's less interactive and more just like reporting back and forth. And like, again, that's a chance for us to really kind of do our Venn diagram and really bring expertise from both sets of the groups of people that we're representing and actually kind of get some good work done that might be helpful to both our committees as well as the entire board and district. So that was one of the things I had as well. So I hope we can stress that in the end of the year report. A couple of things else I had I want to kind of bring up to the group, and happy to take feedback or thoughts on, because these are just me spitballing. So I'm happy to be pointed in the right direction on these. But one thing, and it's been mentioned before, so I won't spend too long on it. I do think that we need to stress the use of reserves and clarify what we mean by one-time funding. I think Eric or Chucky might have mentioned this, but I think part of what I saw in the discussion was an understanding of the concern of having reserves just sit unused by the public and not be put towards the education when there's so many needs out there and everything of the children. But I think that when we talk about sustainability, I think the conversation kind of like broke down a little bit about what we meant by sustainability in regards to, we can't keep relying on reserves to close budget gaps because sooner or later the reserves won't be there. I think just being clear what we meant when we were saying to try to focus those on one-time funding like learning loss. I think it's just a kind of a clarification necessary for further discussions about what we intend to do with reserves, or what we see as the best use of reserves. And that's kind of how I felt coming out of that conversation, that we just need to be more forthright about what we were thinking. But maybe I'm not wrong that we need to stress that, or maybe I'm not right that we need to stress that. One of the things, going back to the old end of the year reports that Chuck, thanks for gathering up and providing for us, because I was going to hunt those down anyways, is that last year's specifically mentioned a comprehensive look by the district at how we handled the pandemic generally. It was kind of like an end of the year report on how the district handled the many different things that we were having to do in those circumstances in the heat of the 2020, especially 2021 school year, and kind of getting an idea of where we put our resources, where they worked, where they didn't, where we had to put some things on hold, and whether it's important to bring those back or not, and especially in regards to closing that learning gap and everything. And I don't know, again, the survey that Jennifer mentioned I saw too is a good way of like understanding how that funding went, and it kind of helps close some of those areas. But I also am just curious if there would be something that we should stress about from the BAC's perspective, that we should definitely try to find out what was happening during that time period, what we were able to do, where we were able to make some cuts that were reasonable, which were necessary to keep, or where we're still, I feel like part of the learning gap loss discussion is around, we're doing all these new things and everything, but have we looked back at what we lost during the pandemic? Do we need to bring that back? Was it worth bringing back? I think that some of those discussions are going to come true more and more as more time passes, about what we should be focusing our resources on, rather than maybe some new shiny objects. Maybe we should go back to what was working. Maybe we don't need to bring back something that wasn't working in the first place and focus on what we should be prioritizing now. I don't know if we've had a clear discussion, a transparent discussion about what all those things are, and maybe just kind of laying it out there for everybody to see where we had successes during the pandemic, what we want to continue there, where we had some misfires, and we want to kind of fix those moving forward. I think just being comprehensive and deliberate about those points is really important. The other thing that was mentioned during your meeting with the board was BAC liaisons with the county. I know that that we talked about, you had all talked about, Christina especially, had being a member of both different committees for both the county and the school district at one time. It's probably something that has really kind of been coming up for our group kind of regularly, is like, how do we fit in with the county? And Chuck, you mentioned it earlier in regards to following enrollment numbers. I think it is really important to have us maybe get a presence there, or at least have some more collaboration directly. It seemed like the board was in tune with that idea, actually encouraging that idea. And so if we can be helping to establish that relationship and really kind of grow it, rather than just kind of feeling like it's an us and them type thing, or we're trying to find out information from them through various different channels, making that a more direct connection, it could be one of those recommendations about what the BAC's role is in regards to the school board's long-term objectives. And then finally, I just want to point out that in every end of the year report I was looking at, there was at least one note about the effectiveness of the BAC and what we were working on, what we were doing. And there's been a lot of great discussion tonight, and I completely agree with all of it, that we had some great success, especially getting Chuck and Eric in front of the board. That was a wonderful discussion. It was good to see all you had that. There's been great comments that Chuck's made from his deliberations with the board, as well as the other committee chairs. I think this is all great and everything, but I really just kind of want to put it back out there. Is that something that we still want to prioritize? Something that we still, are we being effective in the best way we could be? Is there other ways we could be doing that? What does that look like? To me, that's always the one that jumps out to me, is like, I always feel like we could be doing more. I'm not sure what that is per se myself. Got a couple ideas, but I'd love to open it up to everybody else to kind of comment on that. Again, I feel like we made a lot of progress even from my first year last year till now. And so I don't want to say that that's not been done. Like I said, I've already mentioned a few of those examples of what that looks like. But are we there yet? Is kind of my question. What else can we do? What else can we get there? That's kind of where I'm going to leave it all to you. I see a lot of hands up. I've talked for a long time. I apologize. Thank you for giving me the floor and for hopefully answering some of my questions. Thanks.
Yeah, no, appreciate it. Before we move to someone else, Christina, what was that board that was brought up? It was like the Fiscal Sustainability Advisory, something of that nature.
The Fiscal Affairs Advisory Commission, it's the equivalent of the BAC on the county side. And their meetings are totally public, and they rarely have public commenters the same way that we have the same faces of public commenters. So if next year y'all wanting to appoint a designated representative who goes to their meetings, and or if you all wanted to like rotate and go to their meetings, you're certainly welcome to do that, and strongly encourage it. I don't know that we've gotten to the point. We just renewed the advisory policy, the advisory committee's policy, and we haven't gotten to a point of coherence and alignment between the way that advisory committees are governed between the counties and the school boards. So I don't know that we're in a position to be able to formally create that, but strongly encourage y'all to go and do it. I found that it was incredibly informative. Being a member of both committees was a ton of work, because during budget season, you are navigating both budgets simultaneously. Sorry, my dog is now barking. So I don't necessarily encourage a ton of that, because it is a lot to navigate both budgets concurrently. But that engagement is certainly welcome and an avenue that's available to y'all.
Okay, no, thank you. For the group, I'll take that one on, and I'll look into that a little bit further and what our role, sketch out what our role could be as part of that. Catherine.
Hi, yeah. Oh, I really would like to comment on what Christina just said about that other committee. Wouldn't it be great to have that chair come and, meet with us and kind of just talk about how they work as a committee and what their priorities are, something like that in the early fall when we're just all in the learning part of the season? That might something joint with them would be really informative, I think.
Yeah, that's actually a really solid idea, because you think about, all the money flows from county first, right? And so when we're in that learning phase of bringing in different topics over the months that we have prior to the delivery of the superintendent's budget, that's certainly a prime opportunity to get some of those discussions out of the way, but also some greater context of what's going on in the county that will influence what we have to look at. So I think that's a great idea. We'll definitely look for that.
Good. And I had actually raised my hand to share with the group, and Chuck, I sent this to your email a couple of days ago.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. About just the inflationary times that we're in. And I was thinking about that in terms of compensation, because, if you asked me before the latest inflation reports, it's like, oh, great. We finally got some good progress on our compensation. And, unfortunately, macroeconomic events have more than undone the good that was done. And so, I think that we have to keep that, what is the path to the same compensation goals that we've had this year, but now, they have to still be achieved next year. And so I just, keep that as a top priority, because we thought we were good, but, definitely not now. that was kind of the main thing I was thinking in terms of that, there will be more revenue in the county because, well, at least the recommended is to keep the tax rate the same, but with assessments up so much, and everybody's, rich on paper and, where's the money? So yeah, that was my main point.
Okay, thank you. Nellie.
Hi. So a few meetings back, I think we'd been informed that, there were some like data interoperability improvements like in the works where, we'd be able to, or, the school board and all this would be able to like measure some things that that weren't possible to measure before. And so when those some of the bigger improvements are rolled out, it would be great to sort of be informed, because I believe along the way, sometimes, some of the responses we got back were that, oh, it's not possible to sort of calculate the impact of some proposed changes. And so one of Jennifer's comments kind of touched on it a bit as well when she, asked about the possibility of like getting sort of like proposed budgetary impacts for certain things. So I don't know how feasible that is, but yeah, so just rolling back to the initial request, like when some of the bigger data improvements are made, whether we could be informed of them so that we kind of know. Also, in terms of like how the BAC might be more useful, thinking whether one possible thing I thought of was that if we could kind of attack a bigger structural change, whether, a proposed one that might be being considered, and kind of look at it through the year and independent of that year's specific budget or the next year. So it would be sort of look at something where we could kind of come up with some questions and look at some proposed measures and see how the different fallout that would still change. That's all I have. Thanks.
Christina, I guess a question for you from that. It's certainly within the purview of the BAC and the school board to conduct studies. What's your view on that, and where looking ahead, are there areas coming up where maybe that there's an opportunity to do that?
So, sort of. The advisory committees don't have the authority to request independent research. Like anything that is being requested by the school board or that is being created for public consumption, like you certainly have access to, and things can certainly be FOIA'd. Although generally, as having worked with Leslie for quite some time, generally speaking, if you ask, she has an answer. So it's a lot easier than having to FOIA. But in terms of independent research, that's not necessarily an avenue that's available to advisory committees at this time. To the point on data, we're at the very beginning stages of a 3-year process to update our ERP enterprise resource planning system. I think that's what the P means. I can't remember what the P means. But that is like, we're at the very beginning stages of it. We're doing the initial discovery this coming school year, and then the build out will be over the next 2 school years. And that is the thing that's going to be really transformative for our data, because we're suddenly going to have integrated systems that are more modern and they're cloud-based and that update automatically when Oracle releases updates. And that's going to be really helpful, because it is going to, instead of having different pieces of data that don't talk to each other, they'll all be linked together. That is still 3 years out though. So I also just want to manage our expectations that in the meantime, we're dealing with systems that we've been working with for a very long time. And one of the struggles that actually Dr. Cannon says this on a regular basis is we went from being a small school system to being a very large school system very quickly. Especially in this last growth period that we had, when we went from 15,000 students to almost 30,000 students. That happened so quickly that it's been hard for our systems to adapt, and we're still living in a lot of those old systems. So just acknowledging and wanting to manage some expectations that we're not going to be able to give everything right away, but that it's in the works. Does that answer the question, Chuck?
Absolutely does. And that reminds me that I think there's some feedback owed on the PIP for the BAC, so I'll circle back on that one.
Yes, great.
Michael.
Yeah, sorry. One of the things I wanted to circle back on, and Christina, I hope you don't mind another question, but in regards to, again, the BAC effectiveness and the productive conversation you and Eric had with the board, Christina, how does it work in regards to which board member attends which advisory committee? Has there ever been a discussion about like rotating members so that we have a chance to talk to each member at least at one point throughout the year? I don't want to lose you. You're such a huge resource for us, as well as I'm sure you feel like we are to you, but just a chance to talk to the other members of the board maybe more regularly in regards to, I think, answering some of their questions and then getting to see what our process is like. Has there ever been a discussion about rotating what advisory committees you all kind of sit in on, in addition to all the hard work you do on the board?
So we do that when folks transition on and off the board. The reason being that we are getting as board members, I am the liaison to 3 different committees, plus 8 or 9 schools, plus 8 or 9 civic associations. And it's just easier to go, when we have that level of volume, it's a lot easier to go deeper with entities as opposed to rotating through everyone and only being able to go like an inch deep and a mile wide. And so the way that we do it is that when board members rotate on and off, and or as the chair rotates, we make adjustments to liaison assignments. And so I was not the liaison to BAC even last school year, and I only became the liaison to BAC in January, and it's because Monique, who had been the liaison to BAC, rolled off the board, and then I rolled into this slot. Previous to that, I was the Partnership for Children, Youth, and Families, and I was the liaison to ASAC. And so that rotation happens. It's not on a fast enough cadence to solve the problem that you're talking about, Michael. But there are other ways that we can certainly bring in other board member voices, and you can always send us emails. Open office hours are also always available if you have a particular question for a particular board member. And if you stay on the BAC for your full 6 years that you are eligible for, then you're definitely going to get the rotation in that sense. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. I just wanted to clarify and make sure that I understood and just see how you all saw it from your point of view. So thank you for answering that.
Yeah, we have a lot of committees and groups to cover, and so we divvy them up, and then people go very deep in that swim lane in order to make sure that everyone's got coverage.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Other comments from members of the BAC? Jennifer.
Yep, I had a couple of questions and kind of follow up on a thought there that I think Catherine suggested. I guess first of all, my question, and maybe these are best directed at Leslie, but whoever, in terms of like the sustainability issues in the budget, and I recognize that in year 3 we get back out to $70 million deficits. I've heard it suggested that revenues that doesn't capture county revenue, possible growth in revenues. But I'm going to guess, based on looking at this year's budget and last year's budget, and then the commentary that's in there, is that this budget request does indeed take into account the revenue growth, and so that we're not, on the county side, we're not going to sort of, it's not clear that we're going to outgrow this on the revenue growth side sort of alone. I just want to sort of confirm my understanding where this has been a recent comment about the structural deficits that are presented. That's my question. And then additionally, one of the things I noticed in the last couple of budget requests, including this one, is that in terms of sort of for that long-term sustainability, this collaboration with the county has been suggested a few times. And I would love to know more about that. Maybe this is part of that, bringing the Fiscal Sustainability group to us to talk with us next fall or whatever. It's sort of something that, I suspect many Arlington residents have questions around, like, where can we have more collaboration with the county? What does that mean for our budget? And I guess since this has been in there a couple times, maybe again, that's a question for you, Leslie. What are some, when that's been included, what has been considered with regards to noting closer collaboration with the county? If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's just such a wide topic. Let me go back to the first one, which I've already forgotten. Yes, the budget forecast always takes into account the forecast that we are given from the county for revenue growth in the out years. So we don't project what county revenue is going to be. The county projects what county revenue is going to be. And we always use whatever they provide to us for how revenue is going to grow in the coming years. And that is absolutely factored into the budget forecast. What's not factored in, of course, is when things go completely different than we expect them to. If anybody had told me last year at this time that county revenue would go up $36 million for us, I would have said they were completely on drugs, because that is an immense jump in revenue that we've never seen before. So it was totally unexpected. It is what has allowed us to have a not bad budget year this year. But they're not projecting that same kind of, over the top growth in the next several years. If it happens, it's wonderful and we'll get it. But it's not what they're projecting. And so we can only go by what they've given us as the overall projections for the county.
Leslie, how
yeah.
does that sort of one-time bonus that they gave or they're giving compare to other jurisdictions? I'm just looking at the second chart that I posted up from the thanks both of y'all for referencing that document. I'm just looking at that chart, and I think I'm looking at this quickly. What it's telling me is that the contributions to the school system for Arlington and Alexandria seem pretty low, even notwithstanding a big bonus this year.
Yes.
Am I reading that right?
You are reading that correctly, but you also have to understand that there are other measures in there that you don't see. And number one is what percentage of the jurisdiction of the locality's residents are school-age children and attend the public schools. And for Alexandria and for Arlington, that is a small number.
Mm-hmm.
It's plus or minus 20%. 20, 25, 18, 23, somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe even approaching, 27%, right? But in other jurisdictions, it's more like 45%,
Mm-hmm.
50%. I mean, it's very, very, very high. They have a much larger percentage of their population that are school-age children. So
Mm-hmm.
they provide a higher percentage of the overall county's, not counties, just county, but localities' revenue to the school system as a result. So the comparison really needs to be something a little bit different. We need to look at percentage of school-age children and then look at what the revenue amount that is provided. I think actually the county is is generous to us. You know, we have a revenue sharing agreement, which takes a very large amount of uncertainty out of our budget process. You know, we go forward with the budget, the superintendent's proposed budget, knowing that we're going to get this amount of money.
Well,
There are very few jurisdictions in the state of Virginia that work that way.
right. Well, that can also work
very
the other
cool.
way, where you can't you know you're gonna get the money. You rely on the money. They know they're gonna give you the money, and it does. I mean, I'm not speaking like a fiscal conservative here because I'm not, but I'm saying that you're getting that money, and so it sort of limits the sort of motivation to make any hard decisions with the existing budget you have. And I'm not suggesting that we need cuts. I'm not of that voice. I'm just saying that you've taken away one tool in part by having that sort of automatic revenue source.
Having worked in a jurisdiction that did not have revenue sharing prior
Right.
to this one for 16 years, I can tell you that what happened was that everything that they wanted was loaded into the budget to take to city council to say, this is what we need, you have to give us more money. And then city council would make a determination and they would give us whatever amount of money it was that they decided that they were going to give us. And then we had to decide what we were going to take back out of the budget again. Now, in some years, we got what we wanted. Excuse me. Or we got a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't actually force the jurisdiction to say, oh, we're only going to get so much money, so we should be very fiscally responsible and only ask for, you know, only put in the budget what, you know, is absolutely necessary and not ask for any more. No, that's not what happened. What happened was we would put in whatever we needed or whatever we wanted and force, you know, go to the city council and force them to see what we needed and to force them to give us more money.
Mm-hmm.
It plays out almost exactly the same. It's just much easier to budget and go forward when you know exactly how much money you're getting from the county. Not to say that the county hasn't given us more. They have in the past given us more money when the circumstances called for it. I don't necessarily agree that they've given us everything that we've ever asked for, but they have gone above what the revenue sharing provided to the school system and increased taxes. Obviously, when they increase tax for the county, then it's shared with the school system, and you know that's done. The tax rate increase, I'm sure, is done with an eye towards the fact that the schools will get more. They've also done tax increases specifically for the schools where we got 100% of the tax increase. So there's a lot of parameters. You know, we've done a lot, and I think the county has been very good to us. And I think we need to continue to cultivate that relationship, right?
For sure, and I wasn't trying to say otherwise. It's the largest piece of the pie, so I tend to gravitate towards the largest piece of the pie. But thanks for the comments.
Sure. And the other piece, the other part of Jennifer's question, I think, was around collaboration, and there's already a ton of collaboration that occurs. If you ever look at a county budget presentation, they are quick to point out what they have in their budget that actually supports schools. And it's a lot. All school nurses are in the county's budget. They're not in our budget. All the crossing guards are paid for by the county. They're not in our budget. And then there's other stuff, and I can't even begin to tell you what that is at the moment. But they do a really great slide on exactly what they provide to the schools as part of that collaboration. And we're constantly looking for those opportunities, and have been for any number of years. Just some things that lend themselves more readily to collaborating than others. And in some cases, honestly, as a school system, we've talked in the past, for example, because this is in my area and I know it. We've talked about maybe combining our purchasing departments. I can almost guarantee you that if the county took on the school's purchasing, they'd have to add 3 staff members on top of the ones that they subsume into the county, right? Because we need all the purchasing staff that we currently have, plus they'd need more. They would say, oh my God, there's too much work. We need more staff. So that's not to say that we shouldn't be looking at it. But we do that. We do look at it on a regular basis, and we have for the conversations that I've been involved in as an assistant superintendent with the leadership of the school system and the county is always talking about collaboration. It's always an item on the agenda about what can we do that's better.
Got it. So there may not be, so in that recommendation that's been in the budget about greater collaboration for long-term sustainability, there may not be specific proposals that you're suggesting there, but just that general relationship, continuing to cultivate that relationship. And rather than, these would be the 3 or 4 great things that would really, improve sustainability.
Yes.
Okay.
Other questions or comments? Okay. So what I will be asking for, I'll send an email out in the next 24 hours that will outline how I would like to receive input from each of the individual BAC members. Again, it has to be point to point. It can't be shared like a reply all, because would potentially violate open meeting requirements. So the input has to be given to me directly. I'll put it together, and then once that happens, I'll send out a draft to the group and CC Leslie on once that has taken shape. But timeline we're looking at is I'll have a comment period between now and, let's see here, just make sure, put a rough date on the wall for everyone to look at. Of course, my calendar doesn't want to come up. Let's see if it's the 11th, 13th, so not later than probably the 21st or 22nd. I'll be specific. That'll give me roughly a few days to be able to compile everything, make it readable, and then get it back out to everyone for review prior to our June meeting. As well as that'll give Leslie time to begin crafting her input back to the board as part of her response to our end of year report. Last item I would like to address is next year in terms of membership, but also the vice chair position. As we rotate out of this year into the following year, Eric will pick up the mantle and ably lead this team for next year, but he is obviously going to need a vice chair. Important for having a sounding board, backup when you can't be available, but also to be a part of some of the interactions that occur offline that are not part of these meetings, but to begin taking on that role the following year as the chair. So if you are interested in serving are being considered to serve as the vice chair of the BAC, please email Eric and I your interest, and then we'll talk. Ultimately, I will leave that decision to Eric to make the final call, since he's the one that will be taking over next year. So really, it'll be his decision to make. But if you are interested in serving as the vice chair next year, please let Eric and I know over the next few weeks, and then we can, we can both talk, discuss with potential candidates, and then ultimately Eric will make that decision. The other piece is, we do have some members. We have 2 vacancies currently. We do have some other members that are not going to be with us next year. So, one, if you believe that this will be your final year on the BAC, and you would like to, if you don't intend to serve next year, please let me know as soon as practical. But also, if you do continue to serve, and I hope everyone here assembled continues to do so, I think this is a really good group with a lot of great ideas. But as we have those vacancies, other like-minded members of the community that would be good fits for our team, please encourage them to apply to the BAC. On our portion of the school board's website, it has how to apply to the BAC, and would encourage members of the community who are interested in what we do to express their interest, and then we can start those interviews as soon as we're made aware of them. Eric, any thoughts from you? Obviously, as you take over the mantle next year and on the vice chair role. Over.
I appreciate the opportunity to be the vice chair this year. I think it's been a fantastic experience, and I'm looking forward to next year. So, I would love to get everyone involved even more next year. And one of the great ways is for someone to kind of step in and take on that vice chair role. It's extremely rewarding. So. And then the only other thing, I think, as we start looking towards next year and we get to the next meeting, we want to just start collecting topics as early as possible that we may want to start going through early in the cycle next year. So, I've already heard a couple of good topics today where we might want to, see if we can bring someone in from the county, the sustainability group, to come talk. And so those are the kind of things I'm hope we can continue to collect next week and through the summer to get us started right away next year.
All right. Thank you, Eric. And these these vacancies are important to fill, but also the role of the vice chair is really important. For the way that we've set up this structure to have a degree of continuity over a number of years within the BAC is incredibly helpful, given that we do carry with this body a bit of technical expertise on the workings of our school budget that a lot of other committees don't have. And so we can, while we're never going to be able to remotely come to the level of expertise that Leslie has, when we do interact with our peers and our neighbors and whatnot, we do have a better sense of some of the directions that are being taken within APS and the school board and the budget in particular. And so it does help us communicate what we see through our own viewpoints and lenses. And of the different advisory committees, I think this one has unique importance, given ultimately the priorities are reflected in how we spend our money. So I think you just encourage the different positions, be it vice chair or new members for next year, and encourage you to if you do know of folks who are interested or you think might be good fits, to encourage them to apply to this organization and be a part of the team. Before we close shop here, Christina or Leslie, you've been at this number of different iterations. Any advice or comment on the scope of the end of year report, or any advice on kind of how to approach that?
I'll just say that I think that this approach is, everything you've discussed this evening is spot on in terms of approach. We'll be looking at our budget direction. We'll be looking at our school board priorities in the summer and then finalizing those in September. And I'm already thinking about, given everything that I've heard tonight, how those this might factor in, and then how those might be baked into the priorities that then will be baked into the budget directing, because it all builds on each other. So thank you all so much, and super appreciation to you, Chuck, for leading this team for the past year in really wonderful ways. And I cannot say anything but nice things and wonderful things about the incredible structure we have here on BAC in terms of succession planning. So much so that we replicated it, and now we're going to use it for every other advisory committee. So strongly encourage anyone who's interested to step up to do the vice chair role, and then subsequently chair, because we always need some great leaders here in APS.
Thank you, Christina. Leslie, any final comments or thoughts from you before we adjourn?
No, I agree completely with what Christina said.
Okay. All right. Give you all about 22 minutes back. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn, Chuck.
Okay. Are there any objections? Raise your hand. All right. Little curveball there. All right. Again, thank you all for your time and input tonight. Expect an email in the next 24 hours that will outline the input phase of drafting the end of year report, and I look forward to all of your comments. Thank you and have a good evening.
Have a good one.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.